Um, so the topic of my talk today is hard truths of mobile engineering. And as you can see in the photo, one of the hard truths is if you're in mobile engineering, you would have multiple devices. You can't really help it because, and this is actually from part of my collection in the past. And over here is the link to my slide deck. Okay, so I call this the blah, blah, blah slide. Basically, it's just, I'm just put this slide in to say like, okay, the reason why I'm speaking about this whole thing about the hard truths is because I've been around the block for a while. I spent about 20 years in the mobile industry, so, SMS and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I just want to say that, okay, I was at Yahoo with Mike and JBQ as well when we were part of the mobile team. And I used to run the device farm at Yahoo as well. And if you'd like to connect, just search on LinkedIn for Heming and look for this photo, and that's me. Usually only one person, one entry pops up, so that's usually me. Okay, so in case you're wondering about my accent, I'm from Singapore, the land of the crazy rich Asian. So just to clarify, I'm neither crazy nor rich, but I am definitely Asian. And the inspiration for this talk actually is from this book by our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. So he was somebody who never gave us, he wasn't somebody to give us a lot of BS. He would actually tell us like, okay, what were the hard truths about, Singapore as a small nation, what are our vulnerabilities and all that. And so that sort of inspired me to talk about like what are some of the hard truths about mobile engineering. So these are in summary what I'm going to cover in my talk today. So first of all, Apple. Whether you like it or not, if you're in mobile engineering, you have to deal with Apple. I was just speaking to Mike yesterday about a little article that I was writing, and he says, I have no time to look at this. iOS 14 came out. So it's like that, right? You have to deal with that. Next is that testing on hardware and mobile networks are still essential, whether we like it or not. And we need to code defensively for mobile networks. The dream of continuous deployment will be difficult to be achieved. And then the next few points are not so much to do with mobile engineering, but in engineering, software engineering as a whole. So I wrote a little article called "Who Should Do Testing?" Therefore, test. And then I'll talk about these points in there. And then quality is going to come from more craftsmanship, not necessarily more testing. Um, and then code reviews lead to good code quality and lead to good product quality. So one of the things that I've been working on over the last 6 months or so has been this thing about engineering excellence. How do we achieve strong craftsmanship best practices? Because at the end of the day, testing is after the fact, right? You're catching. It's like a police force doing enforcement. What you really want is to train your engineers, your developers to write good code so that you don't have downstream issues, and that your test engineers or your testers are freed up to really find all the nooks and crannies and edge cases that your automation or your code reviews are not able to find. And then lastly, there will always be gaps in requirements. Okay, so the elephant in the room, Apple. So whether we like it or not, and kudos to Apple for actually moving the needle with regards to looking out for customers, the man on the streets. Best interests, things like privacy and all that. Apple has really pushed, moved the needle for the whole industry. Some of us who have been working in the mobile industry remember the time when the telco carriers, were the ones that dictated everything. And then Apple came in and basically changed the whole game. Um, but then for those of us who are in mobile engineering, there'll be times when we're like, oh, Apple, right? And we can expect this to continue uh, on. Um, so things like, for example, moving the goalposts. So things like, I think recently they introduced code thinning, and then, there are always, Apple is always pushing companies to adopt in-app purchasing. So things like that will happen. I mean, they are uh, moving the needle for the industry. Um, Restrictions. So for example, like, your Bluetooth running in the background. So one of the things that I was involved in was evaluating what are some of the contact tracing options for Bayer. So we are a subsidiary of Bayer, the pharmaceutical company. And so we were asked to take a look at what are some of the options with regards to mobile apps for contact tracing. And one of the things that, you know, one of the things that they have, worked with Google was the exposure notification API, which allowed them to basically allow your apps to run Bluetooth on the background. But previously they did not allow, they don't allow that for your normal apps. So you have to use the exposure notification API. And now with as with 13.7 with the exposure notification express, um, these health agencies do not even need to build an app. You just need to set up a server and work with Apple and Google on that. So it's already built into the OS. Then next is secrecy. So Apple is notorious for this, right? If let's say they are working with you to have your app incorporated into the next version of the OS, they make you sign all sorts of NDAs. You can't even tell your spouse you're working on this particular project, and you will have to go in to one of their offices in Cupertino to work on that. So that's a well-known issue. And then new OS or hardware causing map scramble. So I know with once iOS 14 came out, most companies who have an app will be scrambling to see if there are any issues, right? Because you can do all sorts of testing until the last beta, right? But it's still, at the end of the day, when they GA the OS, you will have to test it because there could be issues that you haven't tested for. And when we were at Yahoo, what we used to do was there was one guy who would actually wait outside the Apple store in Palo Alto, um, just to get to buy the new iPhone. And then what we would do is we would circulate across all the app teams to check to make sure that our apps were working fine. So things like that, uh, we have to deal with. And then toolchain updates, this is also quite common. And also the App Store approval and guidelines. Sometimes they are not that consistent, we know that, but it is what it is, right? By the end of the day, one thing great about Apple is the fact that they have full control over the hardware and the software stack. So things like the ECG monitor on your Apple Watch, the amount of calibration that's needed for that, right? Only Apple can do it. You can't. It's very, very challenging to do it on Android. And similarly, I have a friend who does has a voice training app for iOS, and they don't want to do it for Android because it's just too much work. And then, of course, there's also the highly desirable nature of Apple products, right? There was this very funny story of this guy in China who proposed to a girl using 99 iPhone 6s, I think so. Cost him a bomb, but sadly he was not very successful. But it's highly desirable. So testing on hardware and mobile networks are still essential. For those of you who are interested, you can So I gave a talk on my experiences running the device farm sometime in 2016. If you're interested, there's a bit.ly link for that. Um, uh, in summary, whether you like it or not, simulators and emulators represent only idealized hardware. So how the screen, the CPU, GPU, and sensors work together are still quite important. And then you have to deal with sometimes there's bloatware by OEMs. And one thing that what I found a lot of mobile engineering teams are not doing is to test on low-end hardware, because sometimes doesn't mean that you have to release for that hardware spec, but when you test on low-end hardware, a lot of issues show up. So like for me, what I like to do is to make sure that my teams test on for iOS and iPod Touch, and then for Android, you can always go to like Walmart to find these like low end, cheap, under $100, maybe even under $50 Android phones. So yeah, so that's um, what's that. And then also, you also need to understand like what networks your users are on. So like for us, at Climate, we are in the digital agriculture space. So what some of the concerns that we have are like, out in the farm, what sort of networks are our users running on, so that we can build in the capabilities like, okay, if they need to upload data, they go home and upload the data on Wi-Fi. So things like that. Okay, need to code defensively for mobile networks. So you have things like Bluetooth drop connections, and then also like 4G is dropping down to 2.5G because of lack of signal. So basically, what this means is that some testing is needed before a new major version release. So whether you want to use network conditioner or some other tools to vary the network, um, that is uh, that is very, very useful as well. But then, of course, the more cost-effective ways to use beta testers and to really, really exploit these observability and telemetry tools like New Relic, um, or other telemetry. Even like your crash management is sort of telemetry tools already. So I added this photo for your interest. Because I thought it was interesting. So this is actually a photo of Qualcomm's 5G radio prototype in 2016. So you can see it's probably a 2U case. So you just imagine that has been reduced to a chip by now. I just thought this was interesting to share. Okay, so continuous deployment will be difficult to achieve for mobile. Why? Because first of all, you have your App Store submission that takes a few days, especially for iOS. And then because of people like me, I don't like to update my apps once it's out, and I usually turn off my auto updates because I generally like what I'm generally a creature of habit, so I like to use what I have. So recently, I don't know if you noticed, Facebook updated their web UI, and that annoyed the heck out of me. Um, but that's the reality, right? Our users do not necessarily want to update the app. So what it means is you have to do a lot more testing pre-release, and then you have to exploit all these observability and telemetry tools, as well as phase rollout. So I added this photo because I thought it was funny. Every year, or at least every few years, Apple will just make fun of Android because the adoption rate for the OS is usually takes a lot longer because there's also the whole update cycle that the OEMs have to follow. So Apple, being in full control, are able to push the updates a lot faster. So that's again another hard truth, right? That's one of the nice things about Apple. So next is okay. So this is not so much mobile engineering per se, but general engineering, and you can find out the article that I wrote in the bit.ly link down below. So again, these are some hard truths, right? Based on my experience. Test automation is more efficiently written by developers. Test engineers, this is my own personal opinion, test engineers need to be more technical. If you're working on mobile, at the very minimum, you need to know how to write a simple app. Commodity tests can and should be outsourced. So commodity tests are things like your localization, testing for localization, as well as device testing. So if let's say you want to have a bunch of folks doing testing doing exploratory testing on multiple devices, that should really be outsourced. And also, lastly, is try to get comfortable with observability and telemetry, because that is a real force multiplier. And this is so okay. I grouped these few points under what I call engineering excellence. So the first point being that quality is going to come more from craftsmanship, not for more testing. And I think I mentioned this earlier on. Testing is actually after the fact, and you really want to catch the issues up front. So there is a very interesting story. I call it the rubber hammer story. So this is from Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. And he talks about this situation when a number of these American auto executives visited Japan, and they visited a Japanese auto factory. And one thing about American auto assembly lines are that at the end of the line, there will be one person who will have a rubber hammer that taps the doors to make sure that they all fit. What the American executives realized was that wasn't the case in the Japanese assembly lines, and so they asked the engineer, like, why don't you do that, right? And the engineer basically said, well, we design and we build it so that the doors fit. Okay, so instead of doing something after the fact, build it such that you don't really need a whole lot of testing down the road. Next is good code reviews lead to good code quality, lead to good product quality. So on the right, you'll see a little a graph or little chart. So this is actually from Smart Bear's 2019 State of Code Reviews. Can't quite see. And was a survey. They asked about quite a number of companies what was the number one thing the company can do to improve code quality. And the top two are code reviews and unit testing. If you notice, functional testing is number 6. So so a lot of people also believe that with good code reviews, you can get good code quality. And last point is there will always be gaps in requirements. I mean, all of you, your seasoned developers, right? There will always be gaps. And this is a challenge that I have, when you get a user story, do you really know what you're supposed to be building? Sometimes you don't, right? And so how can you clarify the requirements before building or at least tackling the user story? And it shouldn't be just the test team that cares about this. If you are building the feature, you should at least put an attempt to know what is it that you're expected to build. Okay, so the last slide that I have, so I felt that most of the slides above were kind of like negative or quite a little bit depressing. So I wanted to say there's some stuff on the horizon that actually gives us some hope, and it's also a kind of a shameless plug for me because I run the AI in testing and testing AI meetup group, and we have been exploring and getting folks in the industry to talk about some of the stuff that they're doing with regards to using AI and machine learning for testing and DevOps. So some of the things that I felt were interesting to mention are things like bots that are used in functional automation. So Nimble app has this ability to crawl your Android app to look for crashes. And then there's test.ai. They're looking at making the automation a lot more robust. So let's say if you move your button, or you change the color or whatever, it still knows that, yeah, it's the right button to press. And then there's Sophie.ai, where you can record your test, and then it figures out how to run it properly in multiple devices. And then there's DeepCode.ai, who have an intelligent code review tool that checks your code. Basically, it's like a static analysis. Unfortunately, it does not cover Kotlin or Swift or Objective-C yet. It does support Java though. Better ways of measuring functional test coverage. So for those of you who do not know, if and this is my own personal opinion again, and I might be crucified for saying this, but when a test manager tells you we have 100% functional coverage, right, you should take that with a pinch of salt. And I'm not going to go into why, but there are reasons behind it, and I'm actually writing a little article on that. But there is this company called Prod Perfect, which is actually they have a very novel way of calculating functional test coverage, which uses click streams. Yeah, but unfortunately, it's not for mobile; it's for web. But I know the ideas that they have there. I hope at some point some startup will come up with a better way for doing this for mobile. And then again, this is nothing to do with mobile, but more on server side of things. Harness has an intelligent rollback, continuous deployment platform. So basically, what you do is you hook up your APMs, like your App Dynamics and your App Dynamics and New Relic or Sumo Logic. So when the user traffic somehow falls in a certain way, in a certain manner, then the platform will auto rollback for you. So that is the end of my talk. And I'm open for questions.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Let's give a virtual round of applause. We'll take some questions. Quick questions anyone has, please unmute and ask. Type it in the chat. All right, I'll ask a question. If people are still thinking. So you had an interesting slide about who should write test. What is the answer to that? Should it be developers or should it be test engineers?
So that is a good question, and I recommend you to read the article, number one. But the conclusion that I had was it should be a collaboration of both, because developers definitely are more efficient at writing test code. Okay, but test engineers are usually better at finding good tests, right? So that cooperation and that coordination could actually be very beneficial for the entire team.
Right. And that was interesting to see that AI has entered the area of testing. Is looking at these tools, how are they putting them or presenting them? Are they, who is the audience? Is it test engineers, or are they trying to remove the testing people and show that this can be done fully automated?
That's a good question. That's a good question. So to answer that question, I like to use this analogy that I have called the Roomba analogy. The Roomba analogy. So who likes to vacuum their apartment or their house? Nobody does, right? So with the Roomba, you can just let the little bugger run around and just vacuum all over, right? But it doesn't quite catch all the dust, right, or all the things that it needs to capture, right? And so you still need to go and clean up certain troublesome spots. So it's the same with test automation. So AI and test automation, right? If you have something like a bot that finds, all the known crashes, right? Then your test engineers do not have to worry about those cases. They can actually be spending their time writing a better tests for more complicated stuff, right? Say for example, um, if your Android app has some C++ code, say for example, those are very challenging to test, right? You will want them to figure out like, okay, at the JNI layer, what do you want them to test, and so on and so forth. So let the test engineers focus their efforts on more challenging stuff than rather than the just looking for crashes or looking for bugs that could be easily found by a bot.
Right.